Please welcome Developer Advocate Tim Bray.
Hello, you can hear me? Good. Hi. So now we'll start talking about some of the details in Ice Cream Sandwich. It was released last month. Oh, and one important thing. Ice Cream Sandwich is too long, so I will just say ICS, okay? Two things will be happening sometime this month. The Galaxy Nexus Prime will be released in a few countries, and the source code for Ice Cream Sandwich will be released. When you go and get that source code, you will discover that Ice Cream Sandwich is very, very large. In terms of lines of code or new features, probably it's the biggest Android release ever. If you are getting Android source code, you will need a bigger disk. So I won't be able to cover everything in it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the pieces of API that I think are especially important and give you some early advice that we think we've found. If I get finished before 45 minutes, we can do some questions, but I don't think I will. And I apologize to the excellent interpreters if I go too fast for them. Sorry. So I understand that you want to hear about the details of the APIs, but there are actually three groups of things that we have to cover. And we're going to start with the notion of a beautiful experience. So maybe you think that because you are software developers, you don't have to worry about beauty, about aesthetics, about the visual appeal of what you're doing. And if you believe that, you're wrong. We are seeing the quality and the polish and the beauty of Android applications increasing steadily. It's not acceptable to be anything less than beautiful. And one of our key design goals with Ice Cream Sandwich was to increase the emotional connection between the user and the device. Because we did a lot of surveying of people, and they would say, oh yeah, my Android phone, it's useful, I like it, I use it, okay. But we didn't hear enough people saying, oh, I love this thing. And we want to hear more of that. So we've gone to a huge amount of work on the aesthetics and the visual appeal to create a stronger emotional relationship here. To start with, we designed a whole new font for use in this release of the operating system called Roboto. It is somewhat related to the famous font Helvetica, but it's quite a bit rounder and more human. If you look at it, it obviously acknowledges its debt to the robot heritage of Android, but at the same time, it's trying to be friendly. We went through months and months and months and months of work designing this font face. At the moment, it's only for Latin characters. It doesn't have Asian characters yet, but we went to a huge amount of work, and this is the kind of attention to detail that we think we're all going to need if we're going to succeed in this business. So since all your Latin text will be in this font, you really need to look at your text, see how it looks on the screen, see if it's working properly. The next thing we worked on was intimacy. We wanted people to feel closer to the software. So on one side you see, on the left there you see the Compose mail screen from Gmail, and on the right side you see the same screen from Gingerbread, and on the right side you see the same screen in ICS. And you'll notice that on ICS there's a lot less stuff. There are fewer boxes, fewer lines, fewer colors, fewer textures, because what really matters is the text of the email. And there should be nothing in between the heart of the user and the message of the application. So your applications should really start to adopt this same principle of maximal intimacy and maximal beauty. I know that this is not the kind of thing that we developers are comfortable thinking about, but we have to start. The relationship between a user and something that lives in their pocket or in their purse, as long as they're awake every day, the first thing they pick up when they get up in the morning, many times, is the phone to see what the email is. We deserve to show people respect, give them an experience that makes them joyful. Anything less is unsatisfactory. Okay, let's move on to some more technology stuff. Of course, the number one engineering goal of ICS is making it easy for developers to write code that will run on, a small phone, a large phone, a tablet, or a TV. And ICS contains many APIs to help you do that. Of course, this is not something that can be completely automated. You're going to have to do a lot of thinking about what will provide the best user experience on the small screen, the best user experience on the TV, and everything else in between. We're trying to help you with this, but the work isn't going to go away. Let's look at some specific honeycomb features that are now there in Ice Cream Sandwich. If you look at these two screens, you'll notice that on the bottom of the vertical screen and on the right of the horizontal screen, there are soft buttons. So every Ice Cream Sandwich device will always have this black area, either at the bottom or at the right, where there are the three magic buttons: the Home button, the Back button, and the Recent Apps button. Now, you all know in Android, if you press on Home for a long time, you get a list of the recent apps. Every geek in the world knows that. No ordinary people know that. We have to make it obvious. It's a beautiful, very useful feature of Android, so that button will now always be there. This means that for you, as developers, you're going to have to build your application design with the knowledge that there will always be this black area somewhere on the screen. So you cannot have a color scheme that will look terrible next to a black stripe. Now, sometimes you don't want those three buttons sticking in the user's face. So watch this carefully. If you watch this, you can make them go away. Now, they're not really gone away. If you look very closely, you can see there are three small dots there on the right side. So the three buttons are still there. We call this lights out mode. So that if the buttons are still there, if the user touches them, they will react, but they are not so much in your face. So I think that a lot of game designers will use this, and in this case, it's being used in the camera application. Now, if you're a game designer or a camera designer, watch out, because it's quite easy to accidentally touch the back button when you're playing the game. So you need to be careful as app designers to catch that and to preserve the quality of the customer experience. Another new thing that came with Honeycomb was the action bar. That's the blue bar across the top of the tablet. And this is where you have the icon of the app and the navigation that shows you where you are in the app, and the actions that you can take at the current time in the app. This was a very, very popular feature of Honeycomb, and we have a very, very nice library for constructing these things and working with them. Now, things get much more difficult, of course, when you go to a phone, because you don't have as much room to play with. So one thing you can do is to break this long stripe up into shorter stripes. So in this case, he's actually got two stripes stacked on top of each other, or three stripes actually in that. Of course, if you're going to do that, you have to make sure that you leave some room for the real application, the real information you're displaying to people. Another thing you need to think about is that even with a phone, you have this mode and this mode to think about. Now, when they are in landscape mode, there's a little bit more room. So maybe you can reunite the pieces of action bar that you broke up. Another thing you can do is you can put part of the action bar at the top and the other part at the bottom. Here's another picture. There is lots of support in the programming framework to automate the programming. You can, you see the split action bar when narrow thing. It's a good idea to leave the decision to the system as much as possible, because it will make intelligent choices based on the actual size of the screen. This can go in your XML, obviously, at a variety of levels. It works exactly as you would expect. It shouldn't surprise you. There is also support for styling your bars. And there was a very nice piece on the Android developers blog showing how to apply styles to action bars, because your action bar should look like your application. It should have the same colors and so on as your application. But I think that you're really going to have to think hard to consider what should be in the action bars, what should be in the menu, and what should be on the main part of the screen. And balancing your app between those multiple choices is not a science, it's an art. And there's no excuse for, there's no alternative but to try various different things and see how it works out. Okay, what else is new? Okay, notifications. Notifications have really been improved a lot. Now, people have always been able to hit the clear button to ignore all the notifications. But people almost never did that, because usually there were some notifications that they wanted to save, like email, for example, and other notifications they wanted to clear. Oh, this application was installed. So in Ice Cream Sandwich, you can take a notification on your screen. Maybe you wouldn't be able to see anyhow. You can take it and you just go swipe, and it goes away. So you can remove individual notifications. So we've seen a few developers who had made the assumption that the user will always see the notification and will always press it. Well, no. Quite often now they just make the notification go away. So you should be okay with that. Also, the API for constructing notifications has become a little bit richer. And in particular, the icons and graphics you can use are quite a bit bigger and more room to be a lot more beautiful. And particularly in combination with this kind of a device that is very, very high pixel density, if you're not careful, your icons will become incredibly small and look stupid on the screen. So you really need to provide higher resolution icons for all these purposes. Android has always had widgets, and with each release of the system, we enrich the facilities and powers and so on of widgets. These days, you can use your good old-fashioned list view and things like that inside a widget. It all just works fine. They're resizable. That's very good for the user, but it means that you, the developer, have to do some extra work. We've noticed that people use widgets a lot in our usability studies. So if you have an application that is quite popular, that contains information that is valuable to your users, consider having a widget. Because as soon as they turn on the phone, there it is on the screen. They don't have to open your app. It's just there. So if you have an app that is keeping track of a few key pieces of information, like this calendar, where do I have to go next? Or, email, what is my new email, kind of thing. Really, it's worth your while to create a widget. Users love them. Fragments are a new programming API that was introduced in Honeycomb and are also there in Ice Cream Sandwich. If you haven't learned how to use fragments yet, you really should. The notion is that if you can break your application up into logical pieces, you can combine those pieces on the screen when you have a big screen, like a tablet, but on the small screen, like a handset, you move through them one at a time. And you can reuse the same code for the tablet and the handset with the help of fragments. Fragments are available also in old APIs. We have the Compatibility Library, which gives you access to fragments all the way back to Android 1.6. Fragments are a little tricky to understand. They are not, they're not actually units of screen-like views. They're units of interaction, so they have their own life cycle. But it's worth doing. And then there is, a large number of other things that we brought forward from Android 3. I could read them through them all, but, it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Shall I do that again? There you go. Read fast. So most people only thought about Honeycomb if they were designing for tablets. But, these days, there's a lot of things that you need to think about if you're designing for phones, too. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about the compatibility with Honeycomb. But essentially, the thing to remember is that everything that was in Honeycomb is also in ICS. And every application that was compiled to run on Honeycomb historically only ran on tablets, because Honeycomb was only for tablets. But as soon as people start getting these things, they're going to start to try to run those Honeycomb apps on these devices. And unless you're careful, it'll screw up. It'll look terrible. Okay? So you really need to start thinking about this. Okay, let's think. What are the new goodies? So Android has always had sharing, okay? So that you can send something from an app to another app, and that's been based on the use of intents and intent filters. So for the people who aren't Android developers, that means an intent is something that says, please do some action, such as display or insert or delete or something like that, and you can give it a URL, and you can give it a data type, and you just send that off into the system. Please find somebody who can do this thing for me. And then other applications will register intent filters saying, here are the kinds of intents that I can handle. And so an application can very easily ask the system, here's an intent. Who can handle that intent? And then you can put up a memo. So that's when you see you see things like this. So here are some of the applications that can handle this, whatever it is, this picture here. The problem we noticed is that to make your intent and then to go and survey the system to find all the applications that can handle it, you end up having to write a couple of hundred lines of code. And we noticed that every application author was writing the same couple of hundred lines of code, only they were all doing it slightly differently, and they were all using slightly different graphics to show sharing. So we fixed that. If you put this in your XML, there's a new class called Share Action Provider. So if you put that in your menu, it will automatically create that little glyph with the 3 dots and the 2 lines. That is the new sharing glyph. So that will automatically go in your menu. And then in your code, it's pretty simple. So the first thing you do is you go get a share action provider by retrieving it from the menu. So you can item.get action provider. So there's a new method there to get the action provider. And then you make an intent, the intent that you want to share. Nothing has changed there. And then you just go and share that intent. And then everything happens automatically. When the user clicks on that, it will take the intent, it will find the right apps, it will make the list. And 2 things happen. The first thing is that you have to write much less code. And the second thing is that sharing will look the same in all the apps. So you win, and your users win too. The other thing that's really big and new here is the social APIs. Now, you remember, if you were here during the keynote, Brad talked for a long time about the social orientation, and Tony, when he demonstrated ICS, talked about putting people at the center of everything. The social APIs, I think, are the single largest piece of new software in ICS. Everybody who's written Android software knows about Contacts Contract. It's a well-known class that is how you access the contacts and the address book and so on. So this has been hugely expanded. There's a bunch of new stuff in there. And so there's a new app in front of that called the People app. It replaces the Contacts app. Now, you'll notice that when Tony demonstrated that, you saw the big pictures of his favorite people. Well, that's good in theory. In practice, you will notice that the first time you use this, it looks bad because most people have given only very small pictures on their identity. And so when they expand, it looks good. So you have to convince all your friends to put big pictures into their Android phones. You get this quick contact badge. Tony showed that at the top of Gmail. But this is the interesting thing. This is the new social contact profile that everybody gets. And the really interesting thing about this is that you can see that, so it's been scrolled down a little bit, as you can see. So you can see that there's their profile URL, and then there's a Google Plus profile, and there's a LinkedIn profile. Okay? We don't think that Google Plus is the only social network. We think that you should be free to join social networks, as many as you want. We think that the system should automatically keep track of your profile on all these social networks, and we think it should show the stream of updates in all the social networks. Tony also showed a thing where you can go into a person's contact and look, and it will show the stream of their updates from Google+, eventually Facebook, Twitter, all that kind of stuff. Now, be a little bit careful here. That piece of code is not quite finished. So the API for pushing things into the stream is not yet documented. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use it. You can go read the source code, figure out how to use it, you can use it, but it means be careful, because we might change it. But we'll fix that. In a new release quite soon, we will document that API, but be a little bit careful about that. Obviously, this requires a bunch of new permissions. I said this during the keynote, and I'll say it again because it's really super important. The easiest way to get, maybe not the easiest, one very easy way to get in a lot of trouble very quickly is to do something bad with people's data. If people think that you are stealing data about them and revealing it, they will become very angry very quickly. So anytime you are using the APIs, please remember that this is highly personal data. And you have to be very careful in how you use it. Now, we have learned that if you can offer a benefit to users, and that if you are careful, people don't mind sharing personal data. If you tell people, share this data, and I will arrange that, I'm always showing you the weather for where you're going next, or I will arrange that you will only see you will never see ads that you are not interested in, or something like that. People will say, okay, it's a fair deal. But for that to work, there are two things that you must do. You must be transparent. You must tell them exactly what data you are taking, and you have to tell them exactly what you're going to do with it. That's the first thing. The second thing is you must tell the truth. If people find out that you are taking their personal data and using it for something that they didn't know about, they didn't agree to, the situation gets very, very bad very, very quickly. Anyhow, I encourage you to go and spend some time reading up on this stuff. That last URL is very interesting. So that's the URL of a content provider You're Android developers, you know what a content provider is. So there's a content provider for all this raw contact stuff, and you can use it to retrieve the information, and you can also use it to push things in. But please be careful. Okay, what else? Oh yeah, here's another nice one. So there's a nice intent which says, I want to join the network. And anybody who wants to write an Android app, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, anybody, could put an intent filter on the phone so that when somebody says, oh, I want to join, they say, yeah, come join my network. Okay? So you can use this in a lot of ways. I think that we will be surprised in the way that people use this. Okay. Okay, calendar. We finally have a good first-rate content provider for calendar. So there's two things. There's the content provider. It gives you access to the database of events. As you can imagine, it's quite complex. The database is really quite complex. The calendar database has a lot of fields, and some of them are really very tricky. You know, a meeting that repeats every 3 weeks, and at 5 o'clock some days, and at 7 o'clock other days. That's pretty complex data. So I recommend being careful because, you know, this is quite a complex API. So using these APIs, if you want, you can go and schedule meetings for people. You can retrieve the data and, you know, show them, you know, where they will be at a particular time. There's a lot of very, very useful things that you can do with this. But once again, be careful. People, you know, they might get nervous if they find that, you know, they use your app and suddenly they have a meeting they didn't know about. That's not going to make people happy. I think that when you're going to update the calendar, I think it's probably best to do it with an intent, like it shows here. So you fire that intent, and then the calendar program will come up and say, oh, yes, here's a meeting at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Do you want to come? And they say yes, they say no, but they won't be frightened because they will see exactly what's happening. There's no mystery there. Did I forget to say anything? Oh, yes, and one important thing. Of course, many of you have already written calendar apps using the unofficial APIs from before Ice Cream Sandwich. They're broken, sorry. I mean, they will continue to work on all the old phones, but they will not work on ICS devices. So you're going to have some sort of a switch in your code to see what version you're running on and use the old unofficial stuff or the new official stuff. There's a bunch of different techniques for doing that. Sorry about that, but, you know, they were unofficial. They were never documented. Multimedia. There's not too much stuff in here. The OpenMax AL is very interesting. Most people will never need this, but the people who do need it, they really need it. OpenMax gives you a way to write code that talks directly to the codecs, to the hardware, to the streaming hardware, the audio encoding hardware, the audio decoding hardware, the video decoding hardware. There are some people who are doing fancy stuff with games that they can look and say, oh, is this a decoder that I know about? Well, then I will use OpenMax and I will put my own code right up against the decoder. And if you do that, you can get some fantastic media performance. But you have to be super careful because obviously, if you're talking straight to the hardware, you're less portable. So a lot of developers have been asking us for that. HTTP live streaming, it's really the best way. HTTP, if you are doing video transmission or audio transmission, if you should really probe on the server side to see if the client is running a version of Android that can do HTTP streaming. And if it is, then you should use it. It's really the best, I think, streaming alternative because it uses variable compression based on bandwidth and has a lot of really nice tricks in it. What else? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I think I said during the keynote, this is my favorite API in Ice Cream Sandwich, the camera API. You know, you can have an app that is sitting in the background, has a stream in the background, looking through the camera to find people. You say, here's a listener. Please, you know, call this listener when you have found eyes, when you found a face. when you found a mouse. I think that for social apps, the kind of apps you can take to a party, I think this is going to be a huge amount of fun. People are going to have really a lot of fun with this API. There's what the code looks like. Oh, also, I should have mentioned on that previous slide that the picture actually shows that you are focusing on the guy's face. You can have API control of the focusing, of the light metering, of all sorts of things. There's going to be lots of things that were impossible to do with a camera before, but will now be easy. And so here's what the API looks like of the face detect stuff. So there's a new class called face. And so you post one of these things, and then it'll call you back with a list of faces. You notice that's plural, right? It can detect more than one face at a time. Very, very interesting APIs. And I should say, I have to be honest, this is very new code. They were still working on it, like they probably still are working on it. I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few bugs in there. So, be a little bit careful. Okay, what else do we have here? All right, so if you came to the keynote, you saw the beaming, where you can transmit data from one phone to another. It's a nice, easy API. So there's this protocol called NDEF, NDEF, that is based on top of NFC, and it just sends an arbitrary message. And it's really very, very easy. You can sign up to receive a notification when the NFC detects another NFC, and then you just push the message to it. You can just push a default message, and if you send the default message, it will send the URL of your app in Android Market. Makes sense? Once again, I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting applications for this. Now, you notice when Tony did the demo, he put the phones right together, like this. And I don't think that should be necessary. I think you should be able to detect, quite a bit further. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Speaking of longer distance, in Android we finally have ad hoc Wi-Fi. People have been asking for this for years. And so you don't need to be connected to the internet. I have a phone, you have a phone, they both have Wi-Fi, we can talk to each other. The bandwidth is fantastically high. If you have two phones, this far apart, talking Wi-Fi to each other, it's, many times faster than Bluetooth. It's really very high bandwidth. And it's got a nice API, so you can form groups and post data to the group. I think there will probably be a lot. I'm thinking of the people who will do cooperative games based on this. You should be able to have perfect synchronization between 20 handsets in a room quite easily using this API. Now, of course, if you're using this, you can't be on the internet via Wi-Fi, right? Because if you're doing this kind of, it owns the Wi-Fi. You also can't be doing a hotspot. So the Wi-Fi isn't shared. Either the Wi-Fi is being used for internet, or it's being used for portable hotspot, or it's being used for Wi-Fi direct. This is a very popular feature in Ice Cream Sandwich. I don't know how much it is in Japan, but in Canada and America and Europe, there's this thing that happens regularly to people. And it's when you come to the end of the month and you get your phone bill from the phone company, and you open it, because you used too much data. And the phone company charges a lot of money for excess data. And so we're trying to give people some self-defense against this. So there's this very nice app in settings that lets you see how much data you've been using. And if you're using a lot of data, it shows you which apps have been using it. And then you can interactively go and say, no, this data can't use any more, this app can't use any more data. Or this app can only use data when he's on Wi-Fi, and things like that. So the reason that this is important to you as developers is that there's some APIs to check to see if the user has done this to you. You can see, well, what's my background data setting? Am I allowed to use background data? And it's called GetNet. There's an old API that's now been deprecated. The new API, Get Active Network Info. It's a nice API. It's really better. You should check up on it and learn it. Accessibility. Ooh, I'm running short of time. Okay. Accessibility is very important. Accessibility is making your device useful to somebody who has some sort of a problem. For example, they can't see, a blind user. In many parts of the world, there are actually laws saying that you must make your technology available to blind users. Accessibility. Fortunately, with Ice Cream Sandwich, this is very easy. If you put this stuff in your XML, then when they actually when they actually move their finger around, the phone will speak to them and tell them the name of the field that they're on. So it's very easy for a blind person to use an Android phone just like a sighted person. It works great. And you really should do this. You should do it because the law requires it in many places. You should do it because it's the moral thing to do. But you should also do it because it's good business. The data shows that people who put accessibility stuff in their applications have larger audiences. There's a bunch more APIs to make this even easier. So for every view or view group, you can have accessibility events because, as you know, not all of the APIs are constructed in XML. So if you are constructing your API programmatically at runtime. I also have a question for you. If your eyesight is good now, how do you think your eyesight will be in 30 years? These are small devices. They have very small letters on them. Unless you are young with perfect eyes, it's quite hard, actually, to read these things. So if you are putting accessibility into your apps, you're making an investment in your own future. So what else? Properties. Properties are kind of boring. Well, so Java language doesn't have the notion of an object property, so we put one in. You can put this on any object, and it gives you a getter and a setter. This is used mostly by the animation facility in Android, but it was so useful for the animation that a bunch of other pieces of the framework started using it, and now we made it public for anybody. It's very handy. We've noticed that a lot of people are bringing their phone to work. They're bringing their Android phone to the office. And they're not asking the boss. They just go buy a phone, they bring it to the office. And sometimes this makes the boss very worried about all these people walking around with smart, internet-connected phones that have cameras and have Wi-Fi and have all this other stuff. And the guy says to his boss, "Hey, I want to use my phone at work. I want to read my business email." And the boss goes, because he's worried about security, he's worried about privacy, he's worried about liability. So we are trying to put a few more boss-friendly features into the software. So one of them is very obvious, is you can install a policy on the phone that will turn off the camera at work. There are many workplaces where this is required. Also, as you know, most modern network security is based on certificates. And on a modern phone, the number of apps that have their certificates is quite large. So we've provided a central API for a place to store and manage all the certificates on the phone. Very useful. Oh yes, another thing friendly for the boss. So VPN, so that I can be on the company private network on my phone. Now, Android has always had VPN support, but we noticed that there are many VPN vendors out there with their own products that have special features that are interesting to one business or another. And so we have a low-level API in there now offering IPsec. And that means that the existing VPN vendors will be able to include Android. What else? Oh, of course, the browser, WebKit. WebKit has a bunch of improvements because WebKit is always improving. More fonts, faster JavaScript, some more modern CSS stuff. The interesting thing here is actually WebDriver. WebDriver is part of the well-known Selenium browser test kit. So you can write tests now. You can write JUnit tests that will ensure that the browser is showing on the screen what you want to be on the screen. And it's really cool. You can even do a test call that says, pretend the user went like this, with their finger at a given speed, and so on. And you want to say, sure, oh, did the browser go as far as I hoped it would? So there's lots of scope for automation in there. And, everybody knows that every time you increase the testability of software, you also increase the quality. So WebDriver, I think, will be very useful to a lot of people. We have a few new layouts. Grid layout is really the most interesting. I don't know if you noticed, but there are some very simple layouts that are actually quite hard to do. To do, a dialogue with a bunch of fields they have to fill out so that the labels are right justified and the fields are left justified. It's really more work than it needs to be. So there's this new layout called grid layout. I think it's going to be really useful. What's really interesting about it is that the Android SDK now includes a visual editor. So you can design a grid layout just by moving things around the screen. There's a nice video of that on YouTube. It'll generate all the XML and so on. It's really very, very slick. Oh, let me see, what else is new? Well, none of these, I think, are terribly exciting. This Bluetooth health profile is quite interesting. If you look inside hospitals, I don't know about here, but in North America, if you look inside hospitals, there are many Bluetooth devices. The thermometers, the various probes and things they put on you in hospital. And it would be very nice to write Android software to control all these things. Well, that's now should be a lot easier. New sensors, obvious stuff. Text-to-speech. Text-to-speech is very, very important on Android, especially if you want to use it while you're driving, because you don't want to be looking at your phone when you're driving. You want the phone to talk to you. There are many situations where you don't want to be looking at the phone. So historically, there was no official API. Now there is. There's a nice official text-to-speech API. Just as with Calendar, there were a bunch of applications that used the old unofficial APIs. They're broken in ICS, but it's okay. We provided some adapter code, so it should be very easy to include. So I think that's all I'm going to say about the new features in ICS. I'm almost out of time. There are some slightly new best practices. Many people wrote code for Honeycomb saying if the API level is higher than 11, then it must be a tablet. No, wrong. The API level of this is 14, so be careful of that. The action bar is very useful, but there's no code for it if your API is less than level 10, so you might have to write your own. But please, start using Fragments. You can use Fragments on any level release of Android, and it will make your life immensely easier. One strong piece of advice I have is to go to the Android developers blog and read this. Okay? It's from last August, I guess. It's called New Tools for Managing Screen Sizes. Historically, the way you designed your Android screen sizes was whether the screen was small, medium, large, X-large. And we found that was giving developers a lot of headaches. And in particular, the new range of 7-inch tablets, the medium-sized tablets, were having all sorts of trouble with that stuff. So there's a whole bunch of new rules that you can use to decide on your layouts. And in particular, there's this one that we mentioned in the previous slide, the thing about the SWXXXDP. So you can write a rule in your Android manifest saying, or in your layout directory saying, use this if the smallest size is bigger than 600 dp, which is really a good way to go. Of course, it means that you have to really understand what a dp is, and if you read that, you will. I warn you, it's really long. It will take you a long time to read that, but you really need to read it. What else should I say? I think that's about it for software. I'm going to say a few words about this device. It's weird in its size. It's a new size that has not been seen in any Android device before. 1280 by 720, but remember there's that small black area at the bottom or the sides. So you don't really get 1280 by 720. You get a different size depending which way it's being held and so on. The black area is 80 pixels high, so you lose 80 pixels. It's got XHDPI. It's got fantastically high density. And I've seen a few apps running on this thing where the text is too small or the buttons are too small. So you really need to test your apps on this kind of thing. So that's where everything is. Go there, check it out. I strongly advise when we post the source code, do go and download the source code. There are many, many, many lessons in the source code. Previously, I think it's been possible to ignore new releases of Android software, but you really can't because, Samsung and Verizon are going to be spending many, many millions advertising this thing. It's a great device. I'm sure that we are going to sell a huge number of them. If your app is going to really be great on this device, you're probably going to have to use some of these new APIs. So go to developer.android.com, read them, read the blog, download the software, write some great apps. Thank you kindly.